And we are live. Welcome, everyone, to the Connected for Real podcast. I'm Rebbetzin Bat-Chen Grossman, and today with me is Ayelet Schwell. And Ayelet is a birth expert. I don't know. She's awesome. She was my doula in two of my births that were home, so that was really exciting. We can talk about that more. And specifically today, we're talking about birth and the effect on your marriage, and vice versa, your marriage and the effects on your birth. So let's start. Ayelet, introduce yourself, and then we can get started.
All right, great. First of all, Bat-Chen, thank you for having me on your podcast again. It's been a couple of years, and I'm really happy to be here again. So thank you. I'm Ayelet. I am a birth healer, traditional birth attendant. I've been in this field for 17 years, and attending births, processing birth trauma, helping women to work through their birth experiences. And in the past 3 years, I've basically been attending home births, either with a licensed midwife as the doula, or for women who are choosing to birth outside the system and not have a medical professional present. And I have been mostly focused on helping women to make the decisions that are supporting women really in making the decisions that are going to uh, bring them the highest level of connection with their intuition, connection with their body, connection with Hashem, and help them to be as healthy and whole as possible.
That's amazing. Yeah. Whew. That
It's a lot.
is a lot. You do great work. I remember hearing you say that you help women process their birth, and I thought, oh my gosh, really? You can do that? You don't have to carry that story and just the way it is, raw, running your life behind the scenes. That was a real game changer. Just
Yeah.
knowing that it's possible to go back and process. That's the only good way I could think of it. But like really look into it, look at it from the outside and be able to learn the lessons and be able to find yourself within it. And instead of feeling helpless and out of control, taking back the control, taking back
Yeah,
the the ability to connect back to yourself.
exactly.
So
Yeah. And move forward. Like take that, make that story, which started out as maybe causing feeling traumatic or helpless, like you said, and being able to turn it into a source of growth and peace and being able to move forward with that.
yes. And before we get into the marriage part, I do want to say that even if you have a good experience, quote unquote, right? Because like we're all judging our experiences. Um, so bad experience, good experience, it doesn't matter. They all come with some sort of judgment and baggage and things that is really important to look back into and learn from. So even if you think, oh, I don't need to process anything, take the time, do it because it's so, so valuable and it
It
affects your
also
whole life.
brings Absolutely. And it also brings connection, I think, between women. The birth processing work that I do, I call it birthing our stories. And it's actually the unique thing about it is that it's in small, intimate groups and not individual. And when you come together in a group of 3 or 4 other women, and they're all coming from different backgrounds and different decision making processes, uh, and then you're sharing your stories and finding all the ways that you're so similar and your experiences are so similar, that brings a connection that, like, the sound. Um, the echo room. I'm forgetting my words right now, but you know what I'm saying? Echo chamber,
Yes.
that's what I was thinking of. um, that like when you're in this this group of all the people who know the same things as you do, you kind of forget that there's a world outside of there. And in the Birthing Our Stories workshop, you have this opportunity to connect with women that you would not meet otherwise, that you would not be able to have conversations with or really hear their birth stories in their entirety. That you really are able to create that connection with women and that sisterhood, which I think is so essential for us.
Yeah. Wow. I didn't know they were in groups. That's really cool. That
Yeah.
really changes it from like a coaching experience to an actual workshop. It opens your eyes. I love that you say you're not in a echo chamber closed up with your own thoughts. You're sort of open to the new world, to the big world and hearing other people's experiences and then going, oh, she had that too. Or, oh, I actually do have it good. Like
Yeah.
I thought this was bad. I realized no, it's not that bad. So yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. I love that. So let's get into the marriage aspect of birth because I am a marriage coach. My specialty is marriage. And one of the things I find is that a lot of times we are, as women, don't give ourselves permission to lean into the ideal birth that we would want because our husbands aren't on board, or we don't even know what we want because there's a certain system and the way you do things and this is how we do it and this is what you're supposed to do. And so a lot of times we get lost in the noise, and I'd love to hear some of your advice about how to get out of that and really lean in. And I could share my part of the story later if you'd like.
Yeah. So in any, in any decision making process between a couple, you're each coming from your family of origin, from your own culture, from your own uh, place of like decision making and the facts that you have. And now you're coming together and having to have this conversation between two different people that want to do things together. And so in birth, uh, the interesting thing about birth is in the decision making process is that if the two of you are coming from two different mindsets or approaches to health, to birth in general, in the Birthing Our Stories workshop, the first question I ask women is, "Tell me about your birthing culture that you grew up in." And culture, the definition that I use for the word culture is the way we do things around here. And so, if you think about like, how did you do birth, growing up? Like, how did your family do birth? And sometimes it's like, I didn't know anything about it. No one ever talked to me about it. I know what I see on TV, or you might have like, oh, my mother had, all home births, or the other way, right? My mother, always talks about how traumatic and horrible birth is, and so then you have something to start with, like where this woman is coming from, and a man's experience of birth growing up is going to be very different unless you're one of my sons than most women. My sons know a lot more, I think, and probably most doulas and midwives' sons are a little bit more informed. But but they're not, they're not as involved um, in the stories, that even if their mothers and the women in their lives are sharing stories about birth, they would kind of leave the room at that point probably. And so they don't really come in with a lot of information unless there's some specific situation that would have given them an experience of birth. So really they're just coming with very often with the general approach to birthing, to medicine, because we've in the past 200 years we've moved birth from a physiological process to a medical process, and which it isn't. So we're going back, but and so they're that those are the thoughts that are those are the like decision making pieces that they're coming in with. And a woman may or may not have been already kind of hearing from her friends or from her mother, or the other women in her life about birth, for better or worse, and may already be forming some opinions about what is important to her or what is important for her not to have. And now this is a conversation that they're having for the first time, and it's different than the how wanting to have a family and how many children do we want to have and how do we want to raise them. It's this other aspect of that process. Um, and when you have strong opinions from either side, so then that's something that's conflict resolution that that needs to happen.
Right. Right. I love that you say we all have a culture and what that means and like how we do things around here. Um, it's amazing when you asked it. The first thing that I thought of, like, all I knew about birth was that it took 22 hours to get me out. And, my mother had to see the same people come back to the shift the day after, being like, "You're still here." So I had basically only my mother's experience for the most part, because what else are you hearing when you're that age? You don't walk around, unless, like you said, unless you live with someone who's dealing with birth all day and all night, right? Like my kids know about marriage like back of their hand. um it's not something that you get to really explore. And I want to go even further and say that even when you have multiple kids, you're still in that programming. So you get you get to be intentional and start to question it and sort of shift it to where you want to go, but you also might not. And then the automatic default setting is still on.
Right.
So we end up having, you know, people who have a lot of kids or have a couple of kids, and it's just the same story over and over again on repeat because they never really processed it or made their own decisions.
Yeah, and that's that's with a lot of areas of life, but I think with birth we've really been conditioned. Again, I want to drive it home that it's really been maybe 3 generations that birth has shifted from something that women do to something that is done to women. Delivering babies, for example, is a phrase that you would not have heard 200 years ago, and so we and so that's like an important point there. It actually is a new uh, way of thinking about birth in the history of humanity. But when we so yeah, so when there are strong opinions, I'll just go to that point there, or when there no, actually, let's backtrack. When there are not strong opinions, when you just kind of go with the flow, what I've seen, the women who come to me in the Birthing Our Stories workshop, who up until that point had kind of gone with the flow, they're coming to me because something inside of them is telling them that something was not right. And everyone outside of themselves is saying, at least you and baby are healthy, or that's just the way birth is, or you should just be grateful for your healthy baby, or like those kinds of invalidating statements that they don't mean to be invalidating. They actually are trying to help. And they're coming from, most of those people who are saying those things are coming from their own traumas and have never processed them. And so the women, who come to me are saying, and yet something inside of me is saying that it could have been different, that something was not right there, that, like, yes, I should be grateful, and I am grateful, and I love my baby, and yet. And so, and so sometimes it takes the trauma to kind of awaken that inner female intuition that something could be different. And really my goal is, with the Birthing Our Stories and with the birth, you know, support, like the pregnancy support and the teaching, is to show women that there we can do better. We can do better for ourselves, and that doesn't mean that we all go ahead and have home births. That's not what I mean by doing better. But I mean, it's clear that the system is not serving us. Um, it's not even churning out healthy babies and mothers on a regular basis. Like, it's not. So it's time to raise the bar, and I think that we have that ability when we can have these conversations.
Right. I do want, you're saying it's not turning out healthy mothers and babies. I don't want to make one way wrong or one way right, or like everybody should do it this way, because I'm so into the uniqueness and, personalized. Each person is their own unit and has the things that are right for them. Somebody looked at me and said, "You put your baby in my own," which is like daycare. Like, how could you? You're so not the type. I'm like, what? Like, what a judgment. Like, and if I wasn't as strong as I am, I don't know if that would have hit me differently. But I just looked at it and
Sure.
said, we've had a really hard year. We're living through a really hard year. And I know what's good for my baby. I know what's good for me. And I'm making my decisions. Like, thank you very much for the judgment. So I also don't want to say, like, if you went to the hospital and followed the rules and did all the things they told you, then you're wrong. Like, no, it's fine.
No, absolutely, absolutely. And by the way, like I, women call me often and they'll say like, okay, but which hospital? Like if I'm going to go to the hospital, which hospital? And I say, listen, you can have a positive experience in the hospital. There are good midwives. There are, doctors that will listen to you. It's possible. It's just that, and I think what you're asking about, or saying about the individualized care, right? That's really what we can say is wrong. What we can agree is wrong is care that does not take into consideration the individual. And
Right.
that's what we're seeing. That's really like at the root of it. That's what we're seeing being a problem for women, because the minute you step into the system, you're you're subject to the protocols, and
Right.
you're not an individual person unless you happen to be lucky enough to have a midwife who's going to look at you as an individual and take the time. And it's not up to her very often. It's she's got 3 or 4 or 10 other women that she's serving at that same moment. And and there are protocols in the hospital that are meant to protect mostly the hospital and not so much the women. And and so you can go through that process and know you have no complications, and you have a nice lovely midwife, and your desires for your own birth are in line with what works for the hospital, and then you have a wonderful you know birth experience. And why should I want anything to be different? The problem is that doesn't serve the majority of women.
Right.
And the minute that there is a question or there is a complication, then you're coming into conflict with the system. um so that's, I think, if we want to say like what is wrong. And I mean, there's a lot of things, but but one thing that we can say is the lack of individualized care.
Right.
So yeah, so what women are choosing, that's what we have to, that's the challenge, is within that system choosing for ourselves,
Right.
and kind of going up against that. But
Right.
let's bring it back to the marriage aspect, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. No. So
And that
that's what I was
conversation
thinking.
between.
So I started, going with the flow. My first baby was born in America. I had the epidural. They gave me Pitocin, gave me a bunch of other stuff because the epidural and the Pitocin were fighting. And eventually I had this baby that I pushed for 2 hours, not knowing what I'm doing because I couldn't feel anything. And if, for the most part, like you said, happy mother, happy, like healthy mother, healthy baby, everything is fine, move on. But then when I had my second pregnancy is when things sort of woke up and were like, how do I want to do this differently? Or, now that I live in Israel and I'm not in America, how are things different here? And so the systems are different, the protocols are different. There's a lot of different things. And it pushed me to start to think what I want differently. But I won't, I can't say that I had a terrible experience or a bad experience. I just had a normal experience that I wanted to test and see if I could make it better. And so I want to just validate anybody who is, having fine experiences, like no judgment, continue on.
Yeah.
Do your thing, whatever works for you. And and from my first birth to my eighth birth, like, I can't even describe what a transformation, because each birth brought with it another experience and more learning and more things that I can tweak and more things that I can learn. And every birth I learned something new, and every time I adjusted what was right for me then. And I ended up having two home births that were planned, and you were in them. That was really fun. Um, I also did have a midwife, and we have her on the podcast, I think last week.
She's
Uh,
amazing.
yeah, she is amazing, Sarah Seymour. So she was my midwife. You were my doula. We also had other people there too. We had a whole party going. Um, you weren't thinking I was going to do this alone, were you? Um,
Listen,
every person
some
does
people
the
do it to
things their own
party.
way.
Exactly.
I had 5 people at each of my home births. They were different, but it was funny. Besides my husband. So what I'm saying is, my cousin looked at me and said, "I am shocked that you were able to get your husband on board, because when my cousin met my husband was the first year of our marriage. I was pregnant with my baby, and he was so medical and so square and so stuck on this is how it needs to be, and these are the risks and whatever. And then now to see him at a home birth, totally, committed and backing me up and on board with everything that I want, is a real transformation. Like, if anything, that's wow. And that's what people are asking me about. Like, how do you get your marriage to do that, to
Yeah.
really slowly tweak and work together to get to a place where you're both working together and supporting each other, even when one person is not okay with this, or against it, or maybe not aware enough, whatever it is.
Right. So I would say the first thing is that you want to look at your relationship and say, you know, what what can my relationship bear? Because there are certainly women who will say, "This is my body. I'm gonna do what's right for me, and if you don't like it, stay out of the birth space, and we can come back together and do our, parenting thing together, which we agree on." And that's one, one direction that you can go, and it's a valid direction. And often the if the relationship is solid, then the husband will actually feel the same way. Like, it's your body, you do what you want. I can't be here because I can't handle this, and we'll come back together and do our parenting thing. Um, so that's one way to do this. But the other, like, direction, and of course there's everything in between, is to, first of all, and I'm sure, I know you talk about this, is validating each other and the place where each of you are coming from. And recognizing that, asking yourself the question of, um, what is the most important thing to me? And if your husband's support, physical, nochachut, presence, is important to you, then coming to an understanding between you about your birth choices is going to be extremely important. That both of you be on the same page, and or at least supportive. And 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 so the first, like, step I would say is to, in opening that conversation, say, listen, we're coming from different, you know places, and we have different opinions on this topic. And can we just ask the question of, like, is it possible to explore this topic and come to a place where we agree? And just like any other topic, our the hashgacha we want to, follow, or, which is maybe not as emotionally charged, but this is a very emotionally charged topic. We're going to get a guest. We're going to get a friend here. Hold on. Hello, sir. All right. Raveni, Can you? I'm in the middle of a conversation. Can you go to Odelia? No.
You can stay.
Uh,
We don't mind.
yeah, you can stay here if you want. This is Revenair, my
Oh,
baby.
there you go.
um,
So I love what you're
so
saying. Basically, what you're saying is you could just be like, all whatever, I'm doing my own thing. I'm not even talking about it. Or you can open up a conversation and start to see where are we both coming from? What is the emotionally charged, opinions that we have to put on the table, and what's actually going on behind the scenes, and you know, in the in reality, that we want to discuss and come to a decision about. One of the things that I want to add, and you were saying this word conflict resolution, that is really important. The magic in conflict resolution is that we first and foremost, before we start anything else, try to find what is the one thing that we both want. What's the goal? What is the one thing we both want? That's both, we are both here, like if let's say the school calls you for a conversation about your kid and you're like, oh man, there's going to be a big war. Like, no, conflict resolution says you want the best for the child, and the principal wants the best for the child, and the teacher wants the best for the child. And now it's just about coming to an agreement on what that is. But
right.
let's put that on the table. So in a birth situation, my husband just said, I want you alive and well because I love you, and because you're, as much as you want to have all this freedom to do the thing you want, whatever, but if it comes at a risk of having to raise the kids on my own, or, having to live without you, I'm not willing to take that risk. So it was a very sweet and very loving goal to have me alive, which I really appreciated. And obviously, it was my goal too. So we agree on what the main outcome is. And now the conversation isn't about, well, my opinion is, and your opinion is, and my side and your side. Now it's about how can we both be okay with how we get to that goal, right? I remember talking to my husband being like, I just really want to make it happen, but I don't want to go against your will. Like, I don't want to do it to spite you or to do against you. So how can we figure out how to make it work? And he said, I don't care if you get support, if you hire a doula, if you do whatever you need, but I want it to be in the hospital. That was my number 6. So I said, fine. I went to a doula, and I didn't just get her for the doulaing. I got her for the whole process beforehand. Like, I did something like 8 or 12 sessions with her to prepare for the birth. And that was, by the way, the best thing I could have ever done. Best investment ever. Please, everybody, go do that. Oh, it changed my life. It wasn't even about the birth. It was about all the trauma and all the emotional stuff that was coming up, around it and despite it. It was really amazing. And the birth itself, yeah, I would have rather not be in the hospital, but it wasn't as emotionally charged because I had processed. And not only that, that process created the opening for the next birth to be at home with a midwife and a doula and all the things I wanted. Like, when I think of it just as that one situation, I could have gotten upset and said, like, oh, I didn't get what I want, blah, blah, blah. But it was one step closer to the actual goal that I had. And by respecting his needs at that point, the next baby, he was able to respect my needs and be like, yeah, you're right. This makes total sense. We got to do it this way. And it just created a real trust and a way for us to connect in a deeper way. So
Yeah.
don't look at it as like this little minute tiny thing. Look at the big picture. When you can both be on the same, that in the same direction, looking at the same goal, it's much easier to say, what do we need to have in place in order for both of us to feel comfortable?
And that's one thing that I wanted to also bring up, like when you were saying, what do we both want? It's not one thing necessarily. It can be a list,
Right.
of a few things, and sitting down and having that conversation, like, what do I want? And then, and then really, again, like you said, listening to each other, giving each other that space to question, and then recognizing, as you said, you took a doula to help you with this, recognizing that you may not have all the answers, and that's okay. There are people out there who can help you find those answers. I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with couples, um, to help them, like, find that place between them. And sometimes their decision is, yeah, we're going to go with a home birth, and sometimes their decision is, okay, we're going to go with a hospital birth, and we feel good about that. We feel that it's right for us at this stage, and because they've gotten all their questions answered. And that, like, I think is one of those really important factors that, I would say is the basis of my philosophy in general, is if you have a question, if you have a fear, explore it. Go down that road in a safe space. Really ask the questions, really get to the bottom of the fear, of the worry, of the fear of the unknown, or or really exploring that unknown, and then make a decision. Make a decision from a place of knowing and not from a place of fear. So you can have another person in that conversation that can help you just, yes, I have my bias, and I come in and I say that straight up. But I also, meaning, so I put that on the table and I say, but I'm not here about me. I'm here about you. And I want the two of you to come to an understanding of the information, of I want you to feel totally comfortable asking all the questions. And anything that I don't know, I will refer you to resources that you can go ahead and explore on your own. And I will answer all your questions. And the evidence then has its own power and very often that's what men really need, is the information
Right.
to make that logical decision. Whereas the women are very often coming from that emotional place of knowing in their heart, like, what's right for them. And so finding that balance between them, between the knowledge and the emotion, between the logic and the intuition, and not being afraid to ask the questions.
Yeah. Not being afraid. You said, sometimes you may not have the answers and you have to get help. I think it's most times. Even though I'm an expert at a lot of things, I find that I cannot help myself. A very easy example is the interior design. Like, I am such a good designer. I can design for other people. I do graphic design. I design my husband's book. I am like, I'm really fine with that. And yet, when it comes to making my own decisions about certain things, I hire someone else because
Yeah.
I tell her I cannot help myself. There's so much noise and inner conflict that comes up when I have to sit down and design for myself, that it's so much more helpful to have someone on the outside just guiding the process and keeping you on
Mm.
route.
Exactly. Exactly. And someone who doesn't have the emotional charge, like you said, about the topic, that can,
Right.
like, extract the true questions, and get to the bottom of the information that the person needs to have in order to make a good decision.
Right. I
For
think also
sure.
there's, the fear factor is a real thing because, like you said, it's pretty new to see birth as a medical issue, and it's become so normal because of the fear that they've instilled in all of us.
And
Um,
I wanna just say it was deliberate. It was a deliberate campaign to create fear around birth. And a lot of the sentences that we say about birth, but, about the statistics of deaths, of mother, maternal and infant deaths before hospitals, and these are things that were made up. Um, Historically, like, you can go back and, I mean, don't search on the internet because some of those things have been changed. But if you go back in books and you go back in, like, newspaper articles, you will find that, in advertisements, um, uh, that a lot of the fear and programming that we received and that we know today about birth was deliberately created in order to convince women and men, husbands. That was one of the target audiences for the birth, getting birth out of the home movement and away from midwives, was targeting husbands and their fears and concerns. And so those were all, that was a deliberate campaign to
I
instill
did not
fear.
know that, and that's really sad.
Yeah.
um, it's sad, and even if it wasn't deliberate, I think it was the reason why it became so popular. I'm saying, like, I didn't know it was deliberate, and now that you say it was. I'm like, well, no surprise that we're all sitting around fearing birth. But a lot of times, the thing about fear is that we don't want to go there because it's so
Right.
scary. So we won't ask the questions because that's opening up an entire can of worms that we don't want to deal with. And sometimes having somebody say, okay, let's talk about all the questions, or even somebody addressing the questions before we even ask them, can really help. So if you're listening to
Yeah.
this and you're into the whole, topic, just sit down one day and ask the questions. Send Ayelet a list of questions.
Yeah. I'll make it a series of blog posts
There you go. There you
answering these
go.
questions. Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
yeah.
And I
And
think,
now I
like,
want, yeah.
oh, just one more thing about being, asking the questions, having a conversation with someone like me, a doula, a birth, expert who is open. I think the important thing too is to choose somebody who is has knowledge in more than just one direction. Um, and I think that that's something that's going to be important. Meaning, if you want to find the arguments for hospital birth, you can find them anywhere. But if you want to find the evidence that uh, doesn't support that, then you have to go to somebody who is outside that system, and then you can take their information or you can leave it. But then you have it.
Right. Right. I want to also look at the other direction, how birth affects marriage, where the birth experience and having a baby in particular, and sometimes not having one is, one of the bigger things that I see behind the scenes. One of the biggest triggers between husbands and wives that I have spoken to um, is when there isn't a baby.
Yeah.
And that's a really, really sad it just it breaks my heart because it is so painful. Obviously we could speak about it from a very logical place. It's it was the best, it was meant to be, that was exactly what you needed, whatever, like all the great things you could tell someone, it still hurts. Okay, so I'm putting it out there, it is 100% legit that you feel the pain, and that's how you're supposed to feel because that's it is what it is. And a lot of times that really affects the marriage. We should have done something different. You should have done this, and I should have done this. And, why did this happen to us? And and even there was one couple where because of all the fogginess that was happening and, everything in the hospital, they don't know where their baby is buried. So it's like, what, we're going to go back now 18 years and ask them for the records and whatever. And like, you should have
Mm.
asked them right away. And you should have asked. And there's so much, trauma in the experience that wasn't processed that it then goes and affects every other part of their lives and the way that they communicate about, who's taking who to the doctor, there's, it ends up playing a big role behind the scenes.
Yes.
I'm sort
um,
of sorry I said the whole stillborn thing because
no,
regular birth and regular baby also has its effects on marriage, and we could talk about that more, but for some reason that came up for me. So, um, will
Yeah,
take it.
so I think because it needs a place,
Right.
it really needs a place. And uh, I would say, thank God, it's not a place that I am an expert in. Um, uh, I have I have experienced stillbirth with one or two clients over the 17 years that I've been, in this work, but it is not something that I can call myself a the support person for. So we can address it, and certainly give it its place and its place of love, and recognition. But I would say actually let's with that put put that story to the side because I think it is its own topic, and I
Right.
think that there are people who can speak to that better than me. What I so with that in mind, let's go back to the story of birth in general and the majority of experiences, Baruch Hashem, which do result in a live, healthy baby, or a live baby with complications, sometimes due to birth or whatever that story is. But and put the stillbirth story to the side, and that is a story, and it is a place, um, and we hold that. And but I don't feel comfortable talking about that. I don't feel like I have the experience to bring to that conversation. Um, so I'm sending any of you ladies who have experienced that a tremendous amount of love, and support from just being present with you in that place. And know that there are people, and I can share some names with Bat-Chen afterwards that she can bring on here and have that conversation. Um, so going to how birth affects marriage, and there are a few different aspects. There's the birth experience itself, and I want to make a big statement about that. The birth experience and the birth outcome are two different things. Just like any other experience in our life, experience has a place, what we actually went through, and the result is a different thing. So there's that. There's now adding another human being to your family and integrating that person. And there's the aspect, of the experience, which is the mother's experience and the father's experience. And those are two different experiences completely. And I'll give an example. Um, any like significant historical event. So when I was growing up, it was when JFK was assassinated. Like my parents' generation would talk about that, or 9/11. More recently, in New York, or and now today we're creating history. And in 20 years from now, people are going to ask you, where were you the night that of the 300 rockets from Iran? And every single person, we all experienced the same thing. Every single one of us in the world. And each of us will have an entirely different story, where you were, what you were doing at the time, what you were thinking about, how it affected you, um, whether or not it was something that affected you going forward in your life, or whether it was like, yeah, we went into the bomb shelter and we had a party and then it was over, and thank God. Um, you know, or did it cause like trauma going forward? So, in any experience, each individual is having their own individual experience of that event. And we really need to give space to that. That the mother had her experience, the father had his experience, the baby had their own experience of that birth, and now you're kind of bringing this all together into one unit that you have to go forward with together. So first of all, just like recognizing that, in the Birthing Our Stories workshop, we actually talk about, usually in the last class where we kind of close everything up. We talk about like, okay, and taking this home, and how now you've had this processing experience and your husband didn't. So how do you kind of talk about this with him? And I tell them the same thing we did here. Give him the space to tell his story, his version of the story, and it's not going to be easy for you, but don't speak. Don't say a thing. Let him just birth his version of the story. And even if you remember things differently, even if you know that things were not the same, or even if you were thinking and feeling something that he didn't get, it will be so eye-opening to just for him a catharsis to tell the story from his perspective, and for you to hear how he went through that experience. It's really that on its own can sometimes be an extremely healing and connecting, intimate experience of just each of you telling your version of the birth without judgment. Um, and so that's one really useful tip, I think, for going forward and kind of seeing where there are discrepancies in each of your version of the story and exploring those places. Again, we should never be afraid to explore, because in a conversation, you know, I'm sitting on the couch and you're sitting on the chair and we're having a cup of tea and nothing is happening. Nothing is, you know, the words are not causing the thing to happen. So we can, for example, if we talk about, induction and the effects of induction on the woman and on the baby, and all of those things, we're not actually going through an induction. We're not actually having Pitocin, in our bloodstream while we're talking about it. So it's safe. It's safe to talk about it. It's safe to talk about the statistics. It's safe to talk about the pros and the cons, what kind of situations it can actually be helpful, when it should really never be used. And we can have that conversation and put all that information on the table. And then each person can take what is right for them and make a decision based on that information, and it's safe to have that conversation. So when the couple is sitting and telling their birth story, each of them from their own perspective, that conversation is safe because you're just letting the words out. And anything that comes up that's like, well, I don't know what the answer to that is, I don't know if it could have been different, write it down. Just write it down, and then find somebody that you can ask. Maybe
Right.
find 3 people that you can ask and get 3 different opinions. And that's another way that you can just validate and really understand each other. And like Bat-Chen, like you said, take that experience into the future to make your next birth better. Or if you're done having kids, by the way, women who tell me, "Oh, I have a birth to process, but it was like 7 years ago. I'm not having any more kids," and I tell them, "You have a legacy. That trauma that you're carrying, that's creating the birth culture for your next generation. And whether you only had boys or whether you have girls or girls and boys, what you're passing on, whether you're even expressing it in words or not, you're bringing that into their experience. And this is an opportunity to make birth better for your sons, for your daughters, for the world when you process your own experience. So it doesn't have to be in preparation for another future birth. It can be in preparation for births of the future as well. There's
Yeah.
still value in that.
You're saying boys and girls, and I really want to, something really blew my mind. We had a guest who was a doctor, and he's one of my husband's students. He came here, we're talking to him, whatever. And everything I said, he was like, yeah, yeah. And everything he said, I was agreeing to. And I was like, how is a doctor speaking this way? Like so holistically and gets all the things I'm saying. And he's like, because my mother was like that. And I just saw how she lived. And to me, that was normal. And so within the medical world and the medical field, I found myself having to really like question and inquire and raise my hand on things that didn't line up and didn't match up. I'm like, wow, you guys, like we don't only have an effect on our girls and their births, we have an effect on all of humanity, like the men too. And
Mm.
can you imagine what a husband he would make when his wife is having a baby and he understands not just what he was fed by the medical system as being a doctor and taking that one or two courses on birth, but you know, really looking into it, knowing what to look for. It's just amazing.
By the way, it's an interesting point to make that how many birth, like medical professionals in the birth field, choose home birth because they know what happens in the hospital. It's a thing. And,
It's
it
like
goes the other way too. The fear that comes from seeing how things go in the hospital can cause them to want to have their birth in their hospital where they know all the staff and whatever. But it's a fairly common experience for medical professionals in the birth field, men and women, to choose home birth because they're in the hospital system
wow.
and
That's
they're in the
amazing.
birth.
It's like it reminds me of my husband says that all the people who design the phones and the
Yeah,
gamification of a phone, they don't let their kids have phones.
yeah.
They know. They know. My
They
husband's
know
like, if they're not
exactly.
giving their kids phones, why are we giving our kids phones? And it's like, because the school verse, requires it. Like, I don't know. I can't fight too many fights. Um, but yeah, it's amazing. It really is such an eye opener. Sometimes you don't realize how much knowing, uh, can change your opinion.
Yeah,
It's really
yeah.
interesting. Yeah.
So it's just, yeah, another aspect to keep in mind.
I I think just to wrap it up, I want the listeners, you, to bring to your awareness that birth isn't just something that happens and then you move on. It has a lot of effects behind the scenes. And like Ayala said, sometimes 7 years later, you could look back and say, yeah, I have something to process, but what's the point? The point is that you've been carrying it for 7 years,
Right.
right? And, or you can be going through life and going through all the motions and have more kids and move on and move on and move on and eventually turn around and be like, remember that first birth? You know how upset I am about that? And I never told you and blah, blah, blah. And then like all the passive aggressive energies I'm sending my husband is all because he didn't do this, that, or the other, when he was told or asked or whatever. Why are we carrying that? Why are we letting it run the programming behind the scenes if all we need to do is just unravel it? And it's why it's so important to bring this up. When I chose birth as a monthly theme, and there's birth in God and birth in marriage, birth in business, birth in you, birth and marriage really speaks to me because of the effects that it has on marriage for many, many years to come, right? It's not just, oh, we went through the birth and this, her opinion, my opinion, and blah, blah, blah. And she listened or didn't listen to me or respected or didn't respect me, or, all the things that could go through, in that before and after period. But realizing that if we don't take the time to at least process it within ourselves, we won't be able to talk about other things and go deep with other things and really connect on that level that we want to connect with our husbands, because there's always that thing lingering on the side saying like, you can't go there, this is a no-go zone, and anytime you have that about anything, it muddies the water.
Yeah, yeah, and it should be like an alarm for you to go and explore that. Explore is, I guess, my keywords. But yes,
Yeah,
it should be a place to go and ask that question. Why are we not going there?
I like the word
Absolutely.
explore. I'm thinking
Yeah,
that's a good like word of the year thing, explore.
explore.
I like that. Yeah.
Yeah, be
Wow,
curious.
this was an amazing conversation. Is there anything else you want to wrap up and leave our listeners with?
I would just say that wherever you're at in your birthing cycle, whether it's before having kids, in between children, preparing for a birth, needing to process a previous birth. Again, whether it was a positive experience or a negative experience, there could be something to process there, to ask questions about. Don't be afraid to explore. Don't be afraid to or be brave enough, rather. Let's go into the positive language. Be brave enough to give the space to yourself to ask the questions that are sitting on your heart. And even if it's not what the majority of your friends or community members or parents are asking, and the words that are going through your mind are, maybe I'm crazy. If you're thinking maybe I'm crazy, then you need to find somebody who's just as crazy as you to talk to about that. And I'm one of those people. I'm crazy. um, but I'm not the only one. And there are absolutely women who can guide you, who can help you just sort through all of the questions in your mind that you might have taken for granted up until now, and also help you as a couple to go through those questions together when the two of you have a difference of opinion. Mm, I
Yes.
would encourage you to reach out.
I love that. I think it's like you said, find the people who are going to help you work through it. Sometimes it's sitting down with the couple, like, like you do. My specialty is sitting down just with the wife, because I found that that works the best in resolving a lot of the marriage stuff, is giving her the tools to bring it home. Like, I love what you said about the end of your workshop. Here are the tools for you to help your husband, where he doesn't
Yeah.
have to come here and like be pulled to the principal's office and be told you have to sit through a workshop and listen to all the other guys. Like, they're not, some of them are not into it. But if you empower the women to have the skills to be able to do that when they get home, that's the way to really change it. That's
Yeah.
what I've found to really work. So I only work with women, um, and I find that a lot of times it affects the way you run your business, and that's when it comes up, and it affects the way that you connect to your husband, because, as we said, it is sitting there on your shoulder waiting for you to address it.
Yeah.
So definitely an important point. Thank you. Thank you, Ayelet, for being here. How can people find you and work with you?
You can reach out to me. The best way really is on either WhatsApp or just call. I will put my number here. That I don't check Facebook often, but if you leave me a message there, I will see it, once a month or so. Um, but you can find me there. And then Bat-Chen, you'll put in the show notes a link to schedule a call with me, a free, totally free call. Just, let's talk. Let's hear where you're at and what you're needing. And sometimes I'm the one who can support you with that. And sometimes I'll know the person who can be the right support for you. I really have no ego in this. I want people to be helped. So
Yeah,
you can
sure.
reach out to me that way as well.
For sure. I mean, that's the whole point of this podcast. I bring in all these experts, and we just want you to find the person that's right for you, right?
Yeah.
I don't really care if you end up working with me or with someone else. I want you helped. I want you to work with someone, because the power of getting out of yourself and having someone who has been there, knows the process, can walk you through it, can hold your hand, that is so incredible. And it is a gift. It's a gift
Yeah.
that you allow yourself to receive when you're ready for it. So that is why we're both doing this, and all of us, everybody who's been on my show, is one of those amazing people who you can definitely tap into and get the help from. So thank you so much, Ayelet, for coming. Thank you for being at my birth twice.
It was my pleasure and my honor to be with you for your birth. It was amazing. And thank you for having me on the podcast. It's been great.
Thank you. All the best. And don't forget to be connected for real. Come back next week for another amazing episode.